Well, it's 10 o'clock. I know that because I'm be standing in front of a clock. And it does say 10 o'clock, so we can get started. Um, I'm at home, given that I live in Brisbane and we are in lockdown again. And I imagine that many, if not most, if not all of you are in Brisbane as well, but I'm interested to know where you're from. Um, this is, I'll ask you in a sec, this is the project management Q&A session. So it isn't a lecture format. All the information that you need for the module is already in the online Blackboard environment. This is just a chance for a general discussion. So you can ask me questions. I might ask you a couple of questions, and we just flesh out any issues that you have, anything that you're not quite sure of so far in the module. Just bring up anything you'd like about project management in the context of research. I'm joined today by Alexandra. Alexandra coordinates all of the eGrad School modules. So thank you, Alexandra, for setting this up today.
Thank you. Hello, it's me. Good luck today, Mari.
Thank you. Alexandra also moderates the coding eGrad School module. There might be one or two of you that are doing both modules. Yeah, so I'm wondering where you're from. Maybe we'll just test out the chat function to start with. If you just put in the chat where you're zooming in from today. I'm joining from Sri Lanka. Okay, that's a long way from Brisbane. Wow, Sri Lanka. Yeah, there's a Brisbane. So like I said, this isn't a kind of a lecture format. This is more of a discussion. So I'd actually encourage you to turn on your videos if you want to. You don't have to. But because we'll be chatting like this, it might just be easier if you have your video on. We've got Toowoomba. There's someone in Brisbane. Yep, in lockdown, probably at home. Yeah, a couple of Brisbanes. I'm Johnny from China. Wow. It always amazes me where people do these modules from. So what time is it in Sri Lanka, Manula? Is it did you get up in the middle of the night? 5:30 a.m. Oh, okay, well, that's pretty early. And how about in China? What time is it for you in China, Kathy? And you're welcome to, okay, yeah, in the chat. Well, that's very close, isn't it? 8:30, only an hour and a half difference. Well, welcome to you all. So the format of the session today is, I might start in a kind of a similar way to the videos that I usually do each week, in looking at the discussion forum topics, which were based on the poll again this week. And then we'll have a look to see whether anyone has left any questions for us to answer in the forum that was set up for the Q&A, and then throw to you for any questions. Oh, there's a change to the time in China. It isn't 8:30, it's 8:02. Okay, it's good we cleared that one up. There's still only 2 hours difference. So what I might do is maybe I'll share my screen and we'll look at that first poll. So we started these Q&A sessions towards the end of last year. We found that participants in the eGrad School modules appreciated some sort of direct contact. Of course, we have contact in the discussion forum, but everything's always delayed, isn't it? Like you'll leave a post and then you wonder whether anyone's going to answer. If you ask the question, you come back next day, all excited, if you're like me, to see whether anyone's responded. So this just gives you the opportunity to get some direct input. I'm going to share my screen here. Okay. So, just looking at the poll for this week. So, excuse me for looking sideways all the time. My information is on the other screen. So, there were a couple of polls, but we'll look at the first one. In my project, the assumption I'm least confident in, and drum roll, least confident in my capabilities to produce high quality outcomes is the first, the highest scoring one. So this topic revolved around the assumptions and constraints topic. And you're given 4 choices. All of them were chosen. So, and like I've said before about these polls, there's actually no right or wrong answer. There's a few ways that we ask for input in this module. The quizzes at the end, which is kind of the more or less the assessment for you to show that you've engaged with the material. Now, for those, there is a right or wrong answer. But for the polls, I've intentionally left them as open-ended as possible, hoping that there will be a range of responses, because often that leads into the discussion that we have afterwards on it in the discussion forum. So we've got the 8 votes. The assumption I have least confidence in is achieving high quality outcomes. Then there is reliance on other people in the completion of tasks. Then another one, lastly, around people is key stakeholders. So looking at people involved in the project in a different way. And coming in third was issues of cost and finance and funding. Now there's already some discussion on the forum around these things, but I'm kind of wondering, because this isn't unusual. I ran the same poll, the last couple of times we've run this module, and the one that got the most responses was around this capabilities. So I guess it's so this is related to quality, but it's also related to perhaps the view that you as researchers have of your own abilities. So I might kick off the Q&A part with a question to you, actually, about why do you think that this might be coming up regularly as the most common response? Why do you think that researchers, particularly, and in the main, it's HDR students. We do get occasional early career researchers doing these modules, but generally it's high degree research students who are doing these modules. Why do these sorts of students doubt themselves, do you think? How about we turn on our mics for this one, particularly as given that I've shared my screen, I can't see the chat anymore. But if you turn on your microphone and answer, that would be helpful for me.
Hey, Murray, and hey, everyone else.
Hi.
Hello.
Hey. I think personally, I feel like there is a lot of pressure being a high degree research student in so many ways. And that pressure tends to compound, I guess, my anxiety about not being able to produce, just data. Like anyone can generate data, but you need to be able to say that, yes, it is good quality, or at least be able to think about it in a way that is intelligent and structured and can lead to something bigger, or show that you've how to, you've grasped the understanding of your project really well. And being under a lot of pressure, either time-wise or cost-wise, back to that iron triangle, I think it tends to make you doubt your capabilities for that reason. And, seeing postdocs, and if you attend conferences in person or via Zoom, being able to see the high quality research that is out there, I think I can only just hope that, I will be able to produce that one day, but the path to get there is a little bit unclear. And, how I think all the time and energy that researchers put into getting to that, endpoint or good quality result isn't always elucidated, so you can't really understand how much time and struggle that they've put into getting there. It just looks like, oh look, they've got this amazing data and they must be so intelligent and so brilliant, and yet probably behind the scenes they've struggled just as much as we're going to struggle getting through our project, because it is hard work. But I think for me, that's why I personally question, like, do I have the capability right now to produce that high quality end product, that result?
So are you saying that it's perhaps a lack of experience?
Definitely. Not like I'm doing a research, high degree science research, so it's a lot of lab work and things like that, techniques that I'm learning for the first time. But obviously it's going to be a steep learning curve, I think, for anyone undertaking any kind of PhD or research project. It's a lot to take on board initially, and definitely because I'm still in the early days, I guess. I think that's why I still have that lack of confidence in myself.
Yeah, combination of confidence and experience. Thanks, Natalie. And any other reasons why you think this?
Well, I think I would like to go with Logan. It might be an imposter syndrome, because that's what I feel. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, Logan just mentioned in the chat about imposter syndrome, and for me it's the same, because like Natalie mentioned, that when you see people around you and the kind of work they have produced, you sometimes kind of doubt yourself whether you are at that level or not. So yeah.
Yes. So comparing yourself to others.
Others, yes, always.
Do you think that the imposter syndrome is more common amongst HDR students?
Well, when we go to these talks, we do hear about imposter syndrome, but when we are having a quiet chat among HDR students, nobody comes up and tells, I'm suffering from this. So when we have a kind of a chat, which is an official chat, or you go for a workshop, we do hear a lot about this. But individually, I have never heard anyone talk about it. I mean, even I have never mentioned it to any of my HDR colleagues that, I might have this imposter syndrome in me.
Maybe we should explain what imposter syndrome is.
Fake it till you make it.
In case no one is aware of it. Yeah, that's part of it. How about Logan? Have you got a mic?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah. How would you explain imposter syndrome?
I think just touching on Natalie's point would be a good idea, in terms of if you're working with amazing postdocs and professors who've been working for 40 years and trying to compare yourself when you've had 4 months experience to them in terms of quality that you can put out, you're always going to be on the back foot. They've been researching this thing longer than I've been alive. So like, how can I possibly compare to them when they're amazing? So, but at the same time, we don't see the struggle. We don't see the struggles. Like you don't go to a talk by a professor and they put up all this negative data and all the optimizations they had to go through and everything that went wrong in the process. They just show you that graph at the end, which you assume they just got because they're a really good researcher, when in reality, they probably struggled for 18 months to get that one Western blot or like that one test to work. So I think that sort of feeds into the imposter syndrome. But in terms of an actual definition for imposter syndrome, I'm not quite sure. It's more the feeling that everyone else around you is amazing, and you're just somehow getting by and faking it because, I don't know, I guess you see the limitations and constraints of your own research and all the things that could possibly go wrong, whilst you don't see that with everyone else around you. So
Yeah.
I guess that's how I would describe it.
Is it an assumption that everyone else knows what they're doing, but me? But perhaps a little
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, I guess there's there's always going to be some truth in it, particularly if you're surrounded by more experienced people.
Yeah. Could I make a comment there, Murray? It's Gordon here in Toowoomba. I appreciate what you were saying there, Logan and Natalie earlier. And I think it's a fair point to say that with the PhD journey and the HDR journey, we're learning to be researchers. We're researching and we're also learning to be researchers. It's almost like it's a two-pillar kind of experience. So the idea that we're expected to do research, but also we're at the same time dichotomously learning how to do it is a different journey from our supervisors and people that we look up to as being the experts in the field that have obviously been doing that for significant amounts of time. And I just think it's a pretty important point that the learning aspect is something that's pretty unique to the HDR journey when it comes to project management, which probably isn't usual for most other projects.
Yeah, I think I guess going back to my earlier point, do you think, Gordon, that PhD students or HDR students are any different in their personality or characteristics than the rest of the population in that way, or is it just that we're
Inquiring
normal
minds and things, I suppose? Yeah, more likely to be, but yeah, I don't think we're particularly unique. Yeah, and probably we do hold ourselves to a high standard by virtue of wanting to go into more and more learning and study and things.
Yeah.
A lot of my friends think I'm nuts for doing it, so I don't think I'm particularly unique though.
Unless there's a strong streak of like perfectionism that could, I suppose, lead to tendencies of self-doubt, because if you have a tendency to always think you're not quite, that whatever you're doing isn't quite perfect and it needs to be perfect, then I guess you could apply that to yourself as well. Maybe that could lead a little more to imposter syndrome.
Yes, I think that's true.
Any other points about why I think this might be quite common in people choosing, questioning their own capabilities?
I think that HDR people are like perhaps a bit like a lot of the HDR people I know who've kind of come through with me were like this in undergrad too. Like, I don't think it's necessarily unique to HDR, but perhaps the kinds of people who have the drive to want to, I guess, take it further. You're always looking ahead of you rather than where you are at the moment. And so it's easy to, if you're thinking about you're reading other people's completed PhDs to get yourself a framework for your own. And so you're always looking at where you're going to be in 3 or 4 years. And I think it's easy to look at yourself now and think, how could I do that? Whereas you're discounting 4 years of like learning about how to write that way or how to, compile things in that way. But yeah, just like generally, I guess it probably appeals to people who are very driven to looking at your work in that kind of way.
Yeah. So I think they're great points. They kind of reflect this internal process of one, just a practical, perhaps HDR students don't have as much experience in the field that they are, and so then they start to kind of doubt themselves, but also people who are used to performing really well, but then being placed in this challenging environment. I think maybe there's perhaps another thing too in just the nature of research. Perhaps we could throw that in that if we were to say, and this is a real project management angle, if we were to say that projects generally are manageable through a series of steps that you take, and that's what you're learning through project management. And you have a fair idea of what the outcome is going to be from the start, because you've planned it. Let's say you're designing a building. The design is all mapped out ahead of time, and then you just go through the process of putting all the parts together, and at the end you have a building. But with research, quite often it's a bit more open-ended, isn't it? You have a research question, like you don't have a research answer, you have a research question, and then you see whether you can answer it or not. And so I think perhaps the fact that it's quite open-ended in that way maybe makes it a little, it kind of probably brings up anxiety around whether you can actually do it or not. So thanks for your input on that one. So this is a Q&A session for you and I. So I've kicked that off with a question for you. How about any questions you might have for me or the others in the discussion forum here? Any questions?
I have one question here, Murray. Actually, I found it a bit challenging to finish the week 3 worksheet, which is regarding assumptions and constraints, and it also relates to my poll as well, because I polled for if there is a third party involved, and if they do not finish their work in time, then what happens. So is that something that I can include in assumptions and constraints? Because like right now I'm dealing with HPC at QUT, and sometimes I need a particular version of software and it takes over 2 or 3 weeks for them to install it. And till they install it, I can't run any of my programs. So it's kind of a constraint. The thing which I should have been able to complete by February, I'm still waiting on that.
Yes.
So is that something that I can include in this assumptions and constraints worksheet?
Yes, absolutely. It sounds like a really good one to include. I encourage you to go into as much detail as you really like with those.
Okay.
And the more you look at those in further detail, the more assumptions and constraints you'll probably come up with.
Yes.
But was this? It sounded like you started by saying that you were struggling to complete the week 3 exercise.
Yeah, because I didn't understand what all I can include in this and what not. Like the one that you have given as an example, the thesis, and it should be finished within 3 years. So that's one constraint that everyone will have.
Yes.
So other than that, I was not sure that, it can be on the project level, or it can be on the personal level, or it can be something where a second person is involved.
Absolutely. So there's likely to be things that you will be creating as part of your research, and that's going to be completely different for everyone. You might be just creating some data, you may be creating a thing. And so there will be deliverables around that.
Yes.
And there will be deliverables around the writing up of your research. So I expect that those 2 things will be in common for everyone. You mentioned people as well. I imagine that the inclusion of people is probably more likely to be within the assumptions and constraints rather than around the deliverable.
Yes, that's right.
You'll be looking at who might be needed in order to do this thing, and they may be available or not, or or they.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, like I'm waiting for HPC to come back to me and tell me, yeah, that's right.
What if you were going to do interviews this week and you happen to be in Brisbane and you were thrown into lockdown? So an assumption might be that you will have access to the people that you need to have access to, but a constraint would be if circumstances interrupt that. For example,
Kids at home.
Kids at home, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll include these then. Yeah.
Okay. Maybe while we're on the workbook, I might ask if anyone has any questions about the workbook in particular at this point. Alan, yes, I do see your question, and it is in the forum as well, and I'll get to that in a minute. But right now, how are you finding the workbook? Do you have any particular aspects that you're not understanding?
I found it pretty useful. I did have some personal queries on using that 2x2 quadrant grid where we're saying power versus interest. All of my stakeholders ended up in the top two quadrants, so I'm not sure whether I quite grasped that one very well. Like people with everyone seemed to have high power, it would seem, in my assumption. I guess that's as much of a comment as anything there, Murray. But...
And did you include, say, 10? Like,
I put in 10. I'm fairly sure I put in 10. Yeah.
So I guess it depends on the nature of your project. If there are a number of people that are closely involved, I guess they could all have high power. If I look at when I did my PhD, I would have got through my supervisors in the first couple, and I wasn't part of a team. I was just doing it on my own. So then I'd be looking at less influential and less powerful people on my stakeholder matrix.
Yeah, I think I possibly got stuck on. So because mine is sort of directly associated with my role, substantive role at the hospital, I'm assuming that chief execs and people at the hospital are going to be terribly influential in rolling out the trial and things of my intervention. So I'd have to say that they're high power, but it just seemed that I didn't have many opportunities to say someone is a high interest but lower. But that is specific to my project. So
yeah. How did you go with has anyone tried the work breakdown structure yet?
Yep, I have tried it. So I think I've pretty much got it completed. I don't really think I had any issues with it. It all just seemed to flow pretty easily. I think the only uncertainty is because we're aiming for a publication out of it. It's just that's one of the constraints, is that whether it actually gets accepted for publication or not. So something out of our control, I guess.
Yes. Did you include a publication process as part of the work breakdown structure?
Yeah. So it's, yeah.
Was it like, submit to journal,
Yeah. But so basically the second last breakdown is write up manuscript, and then the final is submit
Okay.
and complete project. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess next we'll be looking at timeframes. Once you've submitted, I guess it's a bit difficult to know how the timeframe is going to go. I've had some articles that have been accepted reasonably quickly, and others that could go on for like 2 years before it finally gets published. But
yeah, it depends on the reviewers' comments for sure. But yeah, I think it depends on the journal a lot. But we have a couple in mind already. So I guess when you know what you're aiming for, it might become a little bit easier, at least to get it prepared in the way that they want.
Okay, well, I might raise a question myself. That was from the last discussion forum I had. Someone asked for clarification on the difference between project purpose and project objectives. So this was back in week 1. And in fact, I ask in this workbook for an overview, then a project purpose, and then then project objectives. And in fact, all 3 are reasonably close. So maybe I should just go back and help to clarify those things. The project purpose is at the broadest scale. So it's pretty much a general statement about why you might be doing your project. The reason why, the fundamental reason why, perhaps, and it's possible to just do that in one sentence. I mean, it could be longer, but it could be possible just to do it in one sentence. Whereas objectives are similar because they also involve the why, but they're just more specific and have much more detail. And the inclusion of this SMART goals aspect means that they're just much more definitive in nature. So, there's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So you just need to put a lot more specificity into the purpose to flesh it out a bit. Now, having said that, it doesn't actually exactly differentiate the two, does it? And that's because there is quite a grey area between them. And it may be, in fact, up to you to determine which one is which. I suppose by way of example, a purpose statement might be like to create a more sustainable world. It's a very broad statement, and it might be the reason why the fundamental reason why I'm doing my PhD. But it isn't very specific, and it's I don't think you'd be able to really measure it that well. It might be achievable and certainly relevant, but hardly time bound. So it doesn't tick many of the SMART goal boxes. So for my objectives, then I'd need to just get more into the detail. But they still read like a purpose statement, but just like you might have a series of dot points around them. One might be to determine. I'm basing this example on the PhD that I did. So it might be to determine the carrying capacity of regional areas in Australia. Now it would actually need to put more specificity into that. So by the end of after analysing my results, I would want to know the carrying capacity of Southeast Queensland. So that's quite specific. It is time bound. It's relevant. It's measurable. So objectives should be really tight like that, and something that you can actually tick off at the end. Whereas a purpose statement, it's so broad that you may have a sense that you've certainly gotten closer, but you may not know that you've really achieved it. To create a more sustainable world. Well, yeah, maybe I did in a little way, but I hope I did. But there's no way of really checking. So that's a differentiation. Any questions around that? Okay, well, in the workbook, we move on to next week, time and cost planning, some communication. The activities are reasonably straightforward as they have been. I think I don't get many questions about the workbook, so I always just assume that it's making sense to everyone, but please let me know if it isn't. And then in week 5, we get into some quite detailed time planning with Gantt charts. Now, Alan, you have a question. I'm pretty sure you asked that in the yes, in the discussion Q&A. So thanks for leaving that question in the discussion forum. And as you can see, Alan's left it in the chat as well. I have one about creative work. Do you have any extra different recommendations for people who are doing practice-based research? Now, the difference is probably quite minimal, Alan. Given that project management is around the process, not the exact content. You know, what I'm providing here, what we're providing in this module is a process for you to go through. And given that there's between 40 and 50 people just this time in this module and millions of people out there following a project management approach to various projects, the process itself has to be quite adaptable. And in fact, it's the same concepts that are used on engineering projects, construction projects, IT projects, and research projects. There's the same steps, but of course, when you introduce your own context, your own topic, your own constraints, your own objectives, it's going to be specific to what you're doing. In the research context, I really don't expect there to be much difference if you're doing a creative work rather than a kind of a standard monograph PhD. So I might ask you, Alan, whether you expect any differences. I guess if we're for those who don't know, like there's more than one way to get your doctorate. There's a standard, and there's 2 ways of looking at it as well. So the output can be a monograph, which is a pretty standard document that's maybe up to 100,000 words long, that address this topic from start to finish. Then there's by publication, which is generally breaking the topic into smaller parts and having each part submitted to journals. And there's also creative work where you're actually making something. I guess there's kind of professional work as well. So there's a creative way to do it, but there's also a professional work where people are kind of based in their workplace and are examining or creating something within that environment. And so you're still going to have to plan everything that you do. You're still going to have to work out what you're aiming towards, work out what your time frame is, work out if who your stakeholders are, and all of that. I struggle to come up with anything that I think is particularly useful for a creative-based research that is going to be any different than other research. Alan, do you have any more specific questions around what you think could differ?
I think that, I found the whole module really helpful, and the mapping works for the project as well. I think more just in the sense of when you're presenting timelines and that time component, for what I found is that with the critical research based element, if I put a week of work into that, then that shows in like output, and I can present that to a supervisor, and like it's, I guess, easier to estimate the time required to achieve when it's the research-based side, whereas for the creative side, sometimes you can spend a lot of time on it and not get very far, or spend very little time on it and get quite far. So it was less the iron triangle not working as, or the any of the outlines being ill suited to it. I found them all really useful, but more just how you can accommodate difficulties in estimating things like time. Like if you have a project where you don't have a strong sense of how long it might take, or when you have to be flexible about that.
Yeah, and it's a good point. You know, when I worked in an architecture office, there was always an experienced architect that would be developing the Gantt charts for each project, because they had a fair idea of the length of time that each particular component would take. Now, we don't have the ability, given that everyone in this forum is probably new to a research project and don't have the benefit of relying on previous experience for how long things take. I guess you can ask other people how long it took them, or how long they think it might take for you. But even then, I think the nature of research, not just from a creative practice point of view, means that this period in the middle where you're generating something is probably the hardest to work out how long it's going to take. So from the creative point of view, yes, making something always takes a lot longer than you often think, doesn't it? And I know that oftentimes a lot of your work ends up kind of scrunched up in the waste paper bin, which people don't even see. But I think it's true to say that that can be applied to all research, particularly in this the generation of research phase. I kind of put research into 3 phases. It really went to the standard 3 years. First being preparation and planning, and then the second year being when you actually do something, and then the third year writing it up. Now the write-up is, I guess, pretty standard for everyone. Well, maybe it is different in creative work, if you're doing an exegesis, or if the writing is slightly different. But really, there's a lot of writing to do in that last year, and this is just if you're full-time. Then everyone has to do it, and perhaps that's easier to measure. And the first part is also probably easier to measure, and you have usually pretty strict deadlines as well about how that's going to work in all that planning phase. You're doing literature review and working out your methodology and all that sort of thing. But that's that middle time that can stretch out where you don't expect it. So look, I'm not exactly sure what the best answer to that is, but perhaps for everyone, it's just to ask others how long it took them, and maybe apply, but not just that, ask them for details around different components, not just overall, but how long each particular thing took. Is that helpful? Okay. Logan says, are there any strategies for balancing between project management and actually doing the project? Yeah, well, project management is the planning and tracking of it, isn't it? And then you actually need to do it. And yeah, generally, you're going to be doing both the project management work and the work itself. The strategies for balancing, I would say the main strategy is always prioritize the planning. So project management is the planning stage, because there's not much point doing the doing if you're on the wrong track. You probably eventually realize that you're on the wrong track and only have to turn around and come back again, and you're wasting time to do that. So the main strategy is to prioritize your management of the project. And I mean, that's all project management is, just planning to do it in the most effective and efficient way. Logan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was more interested in terms of if I have, let's say I'm writing a grant and I need, like, I'm nowhere near important enough to be writing grants, but let's say I'm writing a grant and it's going to take me 4 weeks to do. At what point do you stop planning that grant and the project itself and dedicate more time to writing it and perfecting the grant itself? Like surely there's a gray area balance between the two, where how much is too much project management, I think, is probably the essence of the question, because you could spend 4 weeks planning every minute detail of a single project and it would be beautiful, but you haven't left yourself enough time to actually do the work. So at what point, I mean, I guess it's very context dependent, but at what point have you looked at things too closely in your project and everything else on top of that is just superfluous and you're just managing for management's sake?
I think the important thing is to make sure you know what the end game is. If you've set objectives around where you want to end up, then you don't necessarily need to, and oftentimes it's not possible to plan everything in between. You just need to know your destination. So it's like you're traveling somewhere. You know you're wanting to get to Darwin, but you're not exactly sure of the best way to get there because it's maybe it's a location that not many people have gone to before, and so you look at a few guides that kind of give you some indication, but really you need to start and work out which turn you're going to make when you get to the intersection. So I guess it's sometimes important not to plan everything. If you've planned absolutely everything out, you might actually just come to the first intersection and realize that it's a better option to turn left rather than right. And all of that planning has now been superseded. So, but if you know that, if you keep in mind always that you're trying to get to Darwin or wherever, then you're not at least wasting time going down the wrong route. So of course there's no actual answer to that question, and you'll have to use your own discretion. But I guess the best advice is to always look up and make sure that you're not getting caught in going down the wrong track.
That makes sense. Cheers.
Yeah. Any other questions generally? I had a question last time that said, do I show my stakeholders matrix to my stakeholders? Which was, that was a good one. My answer to that one was, if they have high interest and high power, particularly your supervisors, then maybe that they might be interested, but that I wouldn't necessarily go around showing everyone your stakeholder matrix, particularly if if their view of it may differ from yours. If they think that they have more power than you've given them, maybe it's not actually going to be good for stakeholder relationships. So I don't know, I thought it was an interesting question. I never really considered whether you would show people your stakeholder matrix. And I guess my answer was maybe only do it very carefully and and probably not to many other people. But if you are an HDR student, it's probably a good idea to show it to your supervisor and have a discussion about it. But otherwise, it's probably something that you keep to yourself. So there was one other poll. Let's have a look at, see what the response to that one was. Okay. So this was about options. Compare the breadth of options that present themselves in your project with everyone else's in the module. In my project, I am presented with so many options that I struggle to keep up. Several options that I usually manage. I don't have many options. That's just based on how many options you feel you have in your research and whether you're able to deal with them. So I guess it's kind of the middle of the road. That's the most common. I'm present. Yeah, so there's a small, about a third of the group say that they're struggling to keep up with the number of options that they have. So this related to the material on a couple of pages before. I don't know that we go into that much detail for options within your research, apart from those two. But it is I think it is another interesting issue of how do you make decisions around the options that you take. Okay, Ellen, thanks for coming. So we'll make this the last one, and I'll ask you a question. If you consider in your research a recent decision that you made, that you had to make around some options, on what basis did you make that decision? What tilted your decision one way or another? Was it your intuition? Was it your advice from others? Was it your careful planning of your project management approach? I should run a poll, shouldn't I? Another poll. Just put your, well, actually this time, if you can put it in one sentence, the answer to that in the chat, and we'll see how we go with that approach. What was the main basis of your decision-making process? Okay, so we've got a few responses. The first couple revolve around discussion with supervisors, which makes a lot of sense. Going to options with less risk. Yeah, that's a good point. And we get to risk management in week 4. So next week, there is another matrix for you to work out. Yeah, so anyway, I think that was just a second go at this question of options to flesh out a bit more detail. And I imagine that there are many ways that you do make those decisions. Maybe I could come up with another matrix for it, hey? But yeah, consultation, I imagine would be pretty high on everyone's list. And yes, relying on your planning documents, going back to, like, it's what I was saying before about, when you come to an intersection, do you turn left or right? Well, if you know you're heading towards Darwin and the turn right has a sign that says Melbourne, then just because it looks more interesting, it might not be the best option to take. Adjust to the time frame and prevailing context and take the less risky path. Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion around risk there. Yeah, so yeah, great responses. Discussion with supervisors and ascertaining risk. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So looks like the hour's pretty much up. Does anyone have any other questions or comments?
Can I ask you one thing here, Mara?
Yeah.
I know that taking the less risky path is always beneficial, especially when we have to finish the research in 3 years. But what I feel is that if you're going into research, isn't it better to take risk? I mean, even if you don't get the results, you will know that this is the wrong path. And that is something you can let everyone else know that maybe this is not the best thing. So even if you don't get the required results or desired results, like in my case, I'm working with signal processing. I'm in electrical engineering and robotics. So I'm working on a technology which is going to be used for the 5th generation of mobile communication and future generations as well. So the thing that I'm working with, it has not been used so far. So I'm taking risk. So even if I don't get the desired results, I will know that this is the wrong path to go. So maybe something else has to be tested and tried, and because it's a new technology, we don't know anything about it. But then
Yeah.
time constraint is always there.
Yes, I agree to some extent. I think it's always a good idea to have an idea of what the risks are and what the impacts might be. And in fact, that's the matrix that you'll be filling out for next week. So I guess it isn't just about the about whether you should take risks or not. It's about looking at the likely possibility of those risks coming about and the impact it will have on the project. And particularly that impact, if it's a risk that that the results aren't in line with your expectations, in the context of research, that isn't necessarily going to completely negate the research. But if there's a risk that you just won't finish the research altogether in something that you do, if there's a risk that the time will extend beyond your ability to complete the research, then that is something that you'd want to carefully consider. So I guess I just encourage you to have a look at the exercise for next week when you get to it.
Yeah.
And, yeah, if you still have any questions about that, to let me know.
Thanks, Logan. But in my case, it is an evolution because this is a new technology. So anything and everything I do, it will be added into it. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll call it a day. Thank you all so much for joining me and joining each other. All the best for the remaining couple of weeks for the module, and I look forward to continuing to read your comments in the discussion forum.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys. See ya. Bye.
Yeah.